To move away from solving equations and back to simplifying, and we're going to take a look at simplifying fractions. Now you guys all know how to simplify fractions. Notice how in number 1 we could multiply these and call this 6 over 20, which would reduce to what? 3/10. The other way we could have done it was to reduce first. I know 2 goes into itself once, and it goes into 4 twice. Then I would have had 3 times 1 is 3, and 2 times 5 is 10. When you have products in the numerator and products in the denominator, you can simplify first before you think about the divide line. So the line that separates the numerator and the denominator means division. Divide and multiply are opposites. So if you have both the numerator and the denominator written as products, it works. Now notice in number 2, I can't cross out 2 and call that 1 and cross out 4 and call that 2. They're not written as products. Instead, I would just have to add the numerator and the denominator. Okay? Same thing here. I can't cross off the 3's. If I cross off the 3's and call that 7, it would be incorrect. You have to follow order of operations. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 5 over 3 gives you an answer of 11/3. If you cross off the 3's, then you would get 7. All right? You have to follow order of operations. Now, compare that to number 4. In number 4, the numerator is written as a product. 3 times the quantity 6 plus 5. Those parentheses make all the difference. Because it's written as a product, we can cross the 3's out and say 3 goes into itself once and goes into itself once. And we're left with 6 plus 5, which we can write as 11. Now what's going to cross out in number 5? The 2 goes into itself once and it goes into 4 twice. What anything else? X over itself is 1. So in the numerator I'm left with 3, and the denominator I'm left with 10. What about number 6? Is anything going to cross out in number 6? No, because the numerator and denominator are not written as products. That divide line is not an opposite of plus, not an opposite of minus, only an opposite of multiply. So this you would say already simplified. You can put a box around it. Now, what about number 7? Can anything cross out in number 7? Nope, the x's can't cross out because the whole numerator needs to be written as a product. Okay, if it had been 2x times 5 over x, you could cross out x's. But because of that plus sign, then you can't cross the x's out. Okay? All right, now look at number 8. What can cross out number 8? The x's. Goes to itself once, goes into itself once. You're left with 2x plus 5. Okay, so simplifying fractions is what we're going to do today, except they're going to get a little more complicated. Before we go to simplifying the more complicated ones, we have to address the issue that there's a certain number we cannot have in the denominator. What is the number that we cannot divide by? Kevin? 0. We can't divide by 0. So what value of x would make the denominator here in number 9 0? -7. And if you couldn't figure that out just by thinking it, you could set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. And you would say that the excluded value is -7, or x may not equal -7. And number 10, set the denominator equal to 0 to find the excluded values. And then what 2 excluded values do we get? Anna? Good, plus or minus 3. Oops, let's write that. And I always just say x may not equal that. Now in number 11, it's more likely that you'll have to go ahead and set it equal to 0 to find the excluded value. We have a quadratic, but only 2 terms. It doesn't look to be a difference of squares, but I do see a greatest common factor. So factor out of 4x, call that x, and then minus what? So now, using the zero product property, set each of the factors equal to 0. And you get two values that x may not be. X may not be 0, and x may not be 5. So the second part is just finding excluded values. Now, go ahead and turn the paper over, and in this next section we're going to do both. Okay? So in number 12 rather, it says 6 times x to the third. So, and the bottom says 4 times x. So both the numerator and the denominator are written as products. This really isn't new. You did problems like this in chapter 8. Who can simplify number 12 for me? Kiani?
3x squared.
Good. You subtract the exponents, x to the third minus x, or 3 minus 1 in this case, would be x squared, and 6 over 4 reduces to 3 over 2. Is there a variable in the denominator? No, so there are no excluded values. All right, now in number 13, we have 2 times x plus 5 and 4x times x plus 5, meaning that both the numerator and the denominator are written as a product. I see x plus 5 over x plus 5. Anything over itself is 1, so you can cross them out. Anything over itself is 1. Now we can reduce 2 over 4 and call that what? 1 over 2. We still have the x, so our final answer is 1 over 2x. Who can tell me what my excluded values are? Anna?
0.
Yes, that's the excluded value. X may not equal 0. So this is your complete answer. And you would say 1 over 2x such that x may not equal 0. Yes?
Why is it 0?
Because if you plugged in 0 for x, 2 times 0 is 0, and you'd have a denominator of 0, which you cannot have. Now in number 14, the way it's written right now, it's not written as a product, so you cannot cross out these x squareds. Okay? Now in my years of teaching, my students, the error that they have made is getting cross-happy. They see an x squared over an x squared or an x over an x, and they just want to cross them out. I don't blame them. I like crossing things out myself. I find it fun. But don't get cross-happy. You must, write this down please, must factor completely first. And I want you to write it out. So exactly how I'm writing it out on my notes today is how you are supposed to write it on your homework and on assessments. So in number 14, just looking at the numerator, we have a quadratic, but it's not a trinomial. So how is that going to factor? Greatest common factor. Thank you. So the greatest common factor between 2x squared and 6x is what, Griff?
Between what x?
Between 2x squared and minus 6x. We're on 14 here. The numerator. What's its GCF?
2.
2 and what? And x. Good. So that would become x minus what?
X minus 3x.
Just x minus 3, because if you were to undistribute a 2x, 2x times 3 would be 6x. Now the denominator doesn't change. We just rewrite it like that. Now that the numerator is written as a product, who can tell me what we can simplify, what we can reduce? Megan?
You can reduce the 2x and the 6x, so you make both x's 1. So you reduce to 1x minus 3.
Good. So this becomes 1. That becomes 2 goes into 6 3 times. Then x over x squared, that one goes away, and this one just becomes x. 2 minus 1 is 1, and since the bigger one was in the denominator, you put the answer in the denominator. You can multiply this 1 times x minus 3 in your head if you like, but x minus 3 over 3x is your answer. Now you can't cross out anything else. The numerator is no longer written as a product. The whole reason we cross things out is because crossing out is basically dividing. You can only divide or use this rule for products. Now we need to say our excluded values. Tate?
0.
Yes, x may not equal 0. Kiani?
What if you divided
that would work, but I want you to write it in factored form because we're going to be doing much more complicated ones where you have to factor it. So get in that habit and write it out like this first. Michaela?
Why did the x squared on the denominator?
Because if you just had x over x squared, wouldn't you say that would be 1 over x?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes, Chanel?
Why in the beginning of the problem did you only factor the
Numerator?
yeah?
Because there was nothing to factor in the denominator. Okay? Now let's look at number 15. Number 15, try to GCF the top. Okay? Katie, what's the greatest common factor in the numerator on 15?
6.
6. Good. So we'll write that as x plus. Good. Now the denominator is a trinomial, so that's going to factor into 2 sets of parentheses. X and x, and then who can tell me the factors? Coleman.
Plus 3 minus 5.
Good. Plus 3 and minus 5. Now those sets of parentheses mean that now the numerator and the denominator have been written as products. Now we can use that divide line to simplify our fraction. What's going to cross out? Tate?
X plus 3.
The x plus 3's. Anything over itself is 1. You're left with 6 over x minus 5. And then who could tell me what my excluded values are? Megan?
5.
Yes, x may not equal 5. Good. Questions so far? Simplifying rational expressions. All right, a couple more. Now on 16, the numerator really can't be fussed with at the moment. So go ahead and leave that as 8 minus x. But the denominator is a trinomial, so go ahead and factor that. And we cannot forget our Chapter 9 skills. Griff, factors of positive 16 that add to negative 10. See, 4 and 4, will that work?
8.
8 and...
Negative 8 and negative 2.
There you go. Now, x minus 8 and 8 minus x look very similar, but they're not similar enough, so I'm going to teach you a trick. If you have a situation where you have a minus b over b minus a, you're going to do this trick. Factor a negative 1 out of one of them. So I'm going to leave the numerator as a minus b, but if I were to factor a negative 1 out of b minus a, b would become negative and a would become positive, meaning they would switch around. Alright? So a minus b over b minus a really just equals negative 1. So over here, if I instead factor a negative 1 out of my 8 minus x, that becomes x minus 8. That's a trick you can do whenever you have exactly the same thing, and they're both minuses, but they're just in the wrong order. Okay? So you factor a negative 1 out of the numerator and keep the denominator the same. Now, do you see a matching pair that can simplify to 1? What's going to cross out, Justine?
X minus 8.
Good. So the x minus 8's go away, and we can leave this as negative 1 over x minus 2, or we can distribute this minus through the bottom. You don't have to. It's not as gauche to leave a negative in the numerator as it is to leave it in the denominator, but you could write this as 1 over 2 minus x. If you distributed a minus through that denominator, the x would become negative and the 2 would become positive. Either way, what are my excluded values? 2. Good. All right, number 17. Sophia, what can I do to the numerator? Well, yeah, what type of factoring are we going to do?
Would you like x parentheses?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'd say x times 1 is x plus 4 x, like that. If you redistributed that, you'd get x plus 4x squared over x plus 4. Do you see anything that can cross out? No. So it's as simplified as it can be, but we can state the excluded values. What may not x be? Yeah, x can't be negative 4. Good. So watch out. Don't always try to cross something out. Sometimes nothing will cross out. All right, let's look to number 18. Go ahead and factor the numerator. X and x. Let's see. Casey, factors of 10 that will add to negative 7.
Negative 5 and negative 2.
Good. Now the bottom is a difference of squares. A squared minus b squared. How does that factor? Eli.
X minus 5x plus 4.
Yes, let's keep the order, right? So 5 minus x.
Yeah. 5 plus x.
Good. Now at this point, you don't see something that will cross out. Although I see something that's likely. I have x minus 5 over 5 minus x. So we're going to have to use this trick again. When you have exactly the same thing with a minus, but just flip-flopped, what we're going to do is I'm just going to keep the numerator the same, but from the denominator, I'm going to factor a negative 1 just from this one. So factoring a negative 1 out makes that x minus 5. And it doesn't change this one, except I'm going to write it as x plus 5 rather than 5 plus x. It really doesn't matter, though. So now what can cross out? Ingrid?
The x minus 5 and x minus 5.
Good. So we're left with x minus 2. Now we have this negative 1 here. You can't forget about it. So you should distribute it through. You can make it x, negative x minus 5. You could distribute it through the top. So I could keep the bottom x plus 5, which would make the top 2 minus x. In fact, that's probably what you'll see most likely would be to distribute it through the top rather than having these negatives down here. They are equal values. If you selected a number for x and plugged it into both of them, you'd get the same answer both ways. Questions so far? Writing each one as a product before we get cross-happy? Yes, thank you, Michaela. What's our excluded value? Good. All right, so now in 19, it bothers me that the numerator is not written in standard form. Will, can you tell me what the standard form of the numerator is?
X minus 3.
No, not the factoring, just the standard form.
X squared plus 6x minus 9.
It's actually minus 6x plus 9, because the 6x is negative and the 9 is positive. Now let's go ahead and get to work on our denominator. What can we see that we can do with our denominator here? Ingrid?
GCF it.
We can GCF it.
Times x squared minus 9.
Good. Well, you guys, we're going to factor completely before we cross out. So, what can we do to the top? Anna? The top is a difference of squares? Yes, so go ahead and factor the top for me. X minus 3 quantity squared. X times and x plus 3. Good. Remember the rule, the conjugates rule. Now, you guys, don't just cross off this x minus 3, because there's 2 of them up here. In fact, if you don't want to write it as quantity squared, just write it as 2 of them. If you're worried about crossing it out and leaving it with nothing. Cross out one group, anything over itself is 1, and you're left with x minus 3 over x times x plus 3. You do not need to redistribute that x in the denominator. Now go ahead and tell me what the excluded values are. There should be 2. Coleman?
0 and negative 3.
Good. Good, good, good. All right,